Oh, and we are live. Excellent. So, thank you everyone who is tuning in to GuildifyCon 2023. I am TJ Lombardi, author of the Dying Breed series as well as the Scalpel Chronicles, and I'm going to be our moderator for today's panel. Now, today's panel is Keep Moving Forward. And what does that mean? It means how to balance great storytelling with the progression of the storyline. Now, of course, I've got a special guest here with me, which is the ever amazing Brian Norden. His face is on a birthday cake, so I'll be eating Brian's face while we continue this panel. Now, before we begin in our questions, let's go around our panelists and get to meet them. And let's start with directly to my side, M. Zog. I hope I spelled that or said that right.
You actually did. So thank you. I am a crossover to Lit RPG. I've written a few post-apoc series and dystopian, and then I found myself addicted to reading Lit RPG in every spare moment, and I'm like, why don't I write this? So I've got my first series. The first book just came out. The second one's coming out in January. And I'm a mom of 6 kids. I homeschool. I do a bunch of random things like beekeeping, martial arts. I have my MD. So I'm following the footsteps of my favorite authors from when I was a little kid. They had the really fun bios with lots of random things in them. That's me.
Very cool. Ryan, over to you.
Hi, my name is Ryan Maxwell. I am relatively new to the author world. I do have a few manuscripts that I try not to let people read just yet, but I am the writer of the Grand System Vending on Royal Road, where I do have a new chapter releasing every day currently. I'm really enjoying the fact to get to be here with some of the other esteemed authors on this panel. So looking forward to getting to talk with you guys about stuff.
Very cool. Let's go down to you, Kale.
Hi, I'm Caleb Plowman. I write a little bit of stuff other than Lit RPG. I don't think any of it's actually published. Mostly, I think I've got 4 series out now. My pitch for my day-to-day life is I am a family law lawyer, and you should buy my books to save me from that.
Very nice. Then down to my favorite bass guitar author, Matt.
Hey, my name's Matt Dinneman. I write a bunch of different books, but you probably know me from the guy who writes Dungeon Crawler Carl. And I wish I had known about the cake ahead of time because I would be eating some as well. I wore my Norden shirt yesterday, but I didn't want to wear it 2 days in a row.
I know, I saw that. That was an awesome panel. Well, thank you all so much for coming on this panel. And let's go ahead and get into the first question that I have for you all, which I think is a great starting point because when I first read the description for this panel, I instantly thought, oh yeah, all authors, we just write left to right, chronological. And then I realized, no, that's not true. Some authors do like to jump around whenever they feel the inspiration. So what type of style have you guys found in your writing? Do you like to jump around within your storyline and hit some inspirational moments, or do you just stick to a chronological time frame? Kale, let's start with you on this one.
Sure. I absolutely know people who jump around, and I think they're psychopaths. I have met a couple people who have where they're writing chapter by chapter, and they have the programs where they can connect everything, and they'll like write chapter 7 one day, chapter 19 another day. And I think I plot more than pants, more than a decent number of people, but that sounds like madness to me. Part of it is that I started writing using just Google Docs and putting it all into one big document. And the idea of jumping ahead kind of scares me. I will do that every once in a while for sort of like climactic fights, epilogue, like end scenes where it's really important to get the juice right. And I like thought of something while I was in the shower, but it's, you know, it's not anything more than one particular chunk of a scene. And a lot of times it's me like channeling my 80s action movies and getting just the right one-liner that I write in the notes rather than anything more than that. But I'm more left to right than anything.
Okay. Em, let's jump up to you.
I start at the beginning and go to the end. I alternate between outlining and pantsing. The cheat that I think is a nice thing is that little hint that happened way back 20 chapters and then comes to fruition, you know, way at the end of the book. I add those sometimes from the end of the book. I go back and sneak them in. So I may miss. That's the only kind of jumping around I do is I mainly will go back and make sure that, well, in Lit RPG especially, that the stats all lined up. Oh, I forgot about that piece of armor he got. Let me make sure I add that in, that kind of stuff. But generally, start to finish.
Awesome. Ryan, over to you.
I'm also mostly a start to finish, left to right writer, but I do also follow some of what Kayla was talking about, where I'll move forward to write some of the really important scenes as they come up, and when that happens, I'll go forward and write something, and then come back to the next part of it. So it happens on occasion, but primarily right to left to right. But I'm more of a pantser in this instance, so I find a lot of times when I start trying to do that, where I write ahead something I found, and I say, oh, this is going to be chapter 35. I realize later on it's like chapter 42 because I had 3 extra adventures or 3 side quests that the characters went on because I thought of them all of a sudden and they needed to be in there.
Very cool. Matt, down to you.
I tend to jump around like a squirrel on Adderall. I intend to write in the linear fashion. The story itself usually ends up not being in the linear fashion because a lot of times I'll have lots of flashbacks in the actual finished manuscripts. But I don't plot at all. I'm completely a pantser. And if something pops in my head where I want that to happen later, instead of writing in an outline, I'll write the entire scene or the chapter. And then there's only like a 20% chance I'll end up using it in the final manuscript. I do a lot of writing that doesn't make the final script, but I bounce around like crazy.
Awesome. Okay, I think that's a great lead into our second question that I have for you guys. As I was thinking about it, no correlation to the cake, but writing is not really like cooking, where you can just add in a 1/4 cup of flour, add in some sugar, and you have this recipe. There are times where you have to have those certain elements within each scene, but you sometimes need to differentiate that. So when was it that you felt in your writing career that you had learned how to balance all these out and know when to change some of these ingredients to keep everything moving along? And Matt, let's stay with you on that one.
Okay. Well, I've been writing for a long time. My first book came out way back in 2003, which is before some of you were even been born. And I think the single most important skill I learned over all of these years is being self-aware of what you're writing and how it's going to come across to readers. And I think that's one of the hardest things to cultivate over time. So when I write stuff and it ends up sounding stale or boring, I'd like to think that I can look at it, with fresh eyes the next day and then realize that, no, this isn't quite right. So, and that's not something that happened, like, there wasn't like a specific moment where it happened, like January 3rd, 2016 or something. It's just something that's over the years, over writing several books and then coming back to the books later and realizing I could have done this, and this different. And I'm still learning every day, but it's something I think I've developed over time that's helped me quite a bit. And I have no idea if that actually answered the question or not. I'm just kind of rambling, but
no, absolutely. I guess maybe if I could ask a clarifying question, you started in 2003. We're now here 20 years later. Would you say, was there a certain time frame of like after 4 books, 5 books that you started to have more of the awareness of some of those things?
It was slow. And my first book came out in 2003. Second one, 2005, and then I didn't publish another one until 2011. And I was busy having like children and stuff like that in between there. I think it wasn't writing the books that helped me. It was actually being in school and doing critique groups with other writers that really helped. Like the act of reading other people's work while they're working on it was the really helpful part. And that was like right around that same time, 2005, 2006, 2007.
Okay, awesome. Kale, let's jump over to you now.
I think that self-awareness is the really important thing. And what was pretty key for me is my first book ever was a National Novel Writing Month book. And I was really, really, really excited about it. I just bashed a whole bunch of ideas into it. and I wanted to get to all of these exciting scenes that I had in my head. And then I got 50,000 words into it, stopped and read what I wrote, and it was the worst thing ever. It was absolutely beyond awful. And it was because there was no room to breathe. There was just nothing there other than constant railroading from plot point to plot point to plot point. And I just had this realization that compared to a lot of authors here, I actually write very slowly. I just usually write for a lot per day. And what happens with me is I feel like I spent 4 hours on this chapter, so therefore to the reader it gave plenty of breathing room, and there's plenty of plenty of time that happened. And then I just realized that you need to go back to that and look at that in order to realize that a lot of times you're actually not creating the breathing room. A lot of times it's in my head that I have paced it correctly, but I haven't. And really what it comes down to is, the cooking thing, where at some point you just get a feel for it. My first book was awful. My following 2 books were not good. My 4th book was pretty good. And my 5th book was the first one that I actually seriously put on Royal Road and published. But even it, I, look back at it and I wince at the pacing a lot of times. And it's really something where I just moved very consciously, where I was very aware of what I was writing and trying to experiment with like paragraph transitions, experiment with how long I spend on certain plot points in order to get the feel for it. And I treated those books almost as sort of like a training camp, where I figured out how to get into my own writing style and to figure out pacing, because I realized right away that pacing was something that I was going to have a humongous problem with. And I'd like to think I fixed those problems, but who knows? I probably have some people in the comments that hate my pacing and hate my books. So,
All right. Hey, thank you, Cale. Let's go up to you, Em.
The first thing I would probably recommend anybody who writes is read a ton of books in your genre. I remember when I first started writing, I also started many years ago, but then I had kids, and so it took like 10 years to write my first book, and now I write a couple a year. And I remember thinking, I sat down to write down what my character was thinking, and I didn't know how to do it. I'm like, I've read hundreds of, maybe even thousands of books, and I didn't know how to do thoughts. So I had to go grab a paperback off the shelf. It's like sitting in a chair. You can recognize what a good chair is. But then when you go to build it, you're like, wait, I don't know how to do joints, and I don't know how to do this and that. So there's like a learning curve. And I guess there's just reading a lot. And then I have the same thing that Cale was saying. If it takes me 2 to 3 hours to write a chapter, I speed read. In school, I learned to read really fast. I never watch a movie a second time. I don't read books a second time. And so sometimes it's excruciating for me to spend that much time on a chapter, and I feel like it took a long time. But for the reader, like my son beta reads my stuff, and he'll read it in 3 minutes, So it takes just practice, I think, is the biggest thing. I think rather than fixing your first or second book that is not so great, I would write the 3rd or the 4th and just move on from there.
Excellent. All right, Ryan, over to you.
Yeah, I'd kind of echo the last bit of that for sure. A lot of my learning came from beating a dead horse over and over and over again. I had a book that I'd written the whole thing of. I had 150,000 words into it, and I was already like 100,000 words into the second book, and I was just trying to fit a square peg into a round hole, and it just wasn't going to happen. So reading through what all I had over and over and over and over again, trying to just make it work the best I could, taking a bunch of ideas from other people, asking for a lot of help. I asked probably 8 or 10 people to read it and give me their feedback or their ideas from people who were writers. And it's like when you ask for advice from 10 different people, you're likely to get 10 different answers. So I ended up with all this information that I just had no idea what to do with. So I started over, and I was like, I'm going to scrap this. It's 250,000 words. I'm just going to scrap this for now and start over. Take some of the main key points I've learned from this and begin again. And that was kind of the point where I realized, oh, this is the things that I've been doing wrong. And then, TJ, you and I worked on a project together where where we worked on some of the writing stuff versus the system building, and we were built off of what each other knew best. And that was probably one of the biggest points for me to learn. These are the things I can do specifically, because as I'm writing it, I have somebody there going, hey, do this instead, or think about these things instead of what you're doing already, to just try to blow something onto the page.
Very cool. So my next question then, a lot of you guys have kind of mentioned, like, I was reading within the genre, I was learning and just growing these things. So is there a certain book that, as you were gaining these insights, that you read that was a huge inspiration and just said, yep, that's exactly the type of writing I want to be able to achieve? And Ryan, let's start with you actually on this one.
Sure. Well, I started into the genre with Alaron Kong's The Land. That was the first. I didn't even know Lit RPG existed till I read that. So I began there, and it was. I really loved the way that he described his characters and the feelings you got from them initially. And I moved into a couple other books, like Hugo Huesca's Dungeon. I don't remember the name of the book now off the top of my head. I read it so long ago. But he had a series that was, or Dungeon Overlord or something like that, that he read that was really, really moving to see it from somebody thrown into the evil side of the story, and that was pretty cool. And then got another books like Matt's Dungeon Crawler Carl and He Who Fights with Monsters as well. And just some of the voices that they were able to give to characters in a more sarcastic way was kind of what drove me to be to take the writing style that I have now, of a more of a I just don't take this shit seriously kind of writing style to go forward and throw my personality more into the book. And so those are some of the bigger influences on my writing styles.
Awesome. Em, back over to you.
I'm a speed reader, so I used to be able to say I probably read almost all of the top 100 lit RPGs on the bestseller list at any given time. Now, not so much. There's a ton of them out there. But similarly, I like the system change and He Who Fights Monsters, Dungeon Crawler Carl, Primal Hunter, any of Jez Kajayo's stuff, Shadow Sun, pretty much. I don't know that any single one did. I think just constantly reading them made me enjoy it. Anybody who likes gaming or progression, it did kind of spoil me for all of the regular fantasy, because I kept going like, where's the endorphin hit of them reaching all these little tiny milestones that make me want to keep turning the page? I don't want to wait till the final battle at the end when he beats the dragon. I want to do stuff all along the way. So I think that was probably the big thing that inspired me to write it, is the little checkpoints. Like, all of us like to gain a level in this spell, or, go from level 5 to level 6 and then get the big payoff at the end. But all the little payoffs is what does it for me.
Awesome. Matt, down to you.
Well, if we're going to talk about, you didn't specify specifically lit RPG books, but I've been kind of like I've been reading my whole life. I read a lot. I'm not necessarily a speed reader, but I'm always listening to an audiobook and reading a book at a time. And I have a pretty short list of what the most influential books to me that made me want to write. Anything by Robert R. McCammon, 80s horror, but he still writes. He wrote a book called Boy's Life that was pretty influential. There's a book called Tigana by Guy Gavriel Kay, which is my favorite fantasy book of all time. And I don't write anything like him. He has a very, very flowery command of the English language, even though he's actually a French speaker. And it's an amazing book in the way that I learned how to appreciate the way sentences are structured and stuff like that. So like there's different, it's like a quilt, different parts of
right.
what I write all come from different styles of reading. As far as lit RPG is concerned, my first was the Russian ones. Yeah, so Vasily Mahenko's, however you pronounce his name, sorry, Vasily. Some of his books were some of the first ones I read that were in the genre, and I really fell in love with it. Like the actual plot, that sort of thing.
No, absolutely. And I think for myself, when I was thinking of the question is, just because something may not be lit in lit RPG doesn't mean you can't draw influence from it and learn from it. So that's great. I love that.
And I'll take it a step further, and I say it's absolutely necessary to read lit RPG if you want to write in lit RPG, but you should spend a lot of time reading other books as well outside the genre, westerns, horror, romance, even. You should be as well rounded as you can.
Nope. Love it. Thanks, Matt. Kale, over to you.
Yeah, so I had myself muted because I don't know if the apocalyptic storm I just sat through was coming through, but it was like thumb-sized hailstones were coming down there. So I kind of have 3-4 different aspects of how I write. One of the big ones is Star Wars, and it's not necessarily for any reason other than that I was obsessed with it as a kid and just went over the story with a fine-toothed comb over and over and over again, consumed a lot of media that was people going over the storytelling elements and beats. And it's a lot of what taught me how to be purposeful with what I was writing rather than just throwing ideas out there, trying to think of what role this is happening, how this is driving character development. Because, I'm thinking back to Obi-Wan sacrificing himself. What role does that have in fulfilling Luke as a character? So again, it's not like it's anything strange or above the norm or whatever. It's just the thing that I watched 8 billion times and watched 8 billion remakes of, read all the books on, that sort of thing. My fighting style, I was obsessed with R.A. Salvatore and Salvatore and the Drizzt books growing up. And if people have read my books, they probably can tell that I get a little bit too much into kinetic fighting rather than just kind of describing it. And that's really an homage to him. But as for the lit RPG genre, kind of what Matt was saying, I actually took a really weird route here where I was obsessively reading supernatural romance. And then I moved from supernatural romance to the various Chinese progression fantasy stuff. Most of it was machine translated and beyond awful. The book I will be citing is Coiling Dragon, which was pretty dang good. But what happened is I just read through a whole bunch of that stuff, just, 5,000 page book, 5,000 page book, 5,000 page book. And then at some point I was like, God, someone has to be doing this, but writing it in a way that doesn't make me want to gouge my eyes out. And that's when I found lit RPG, because it's the same thing, but with, the norms that I would, actually enjoyed. And so I have a whole bunch of lit RPG books that were foundational to me that I really, really liked, but it really more felt like the sort of breath of relief after I had just finished, 6 months straight of reading nothing but the most cringy Xianja out there.
Right. Awesome. Okay, so I think this is a great lead into 2 questions that Sharon Schultz actually asked us. The first one was, does the progression ever get in the way of the storytelling? And if so, how to cope with that? But then she follows up at the very bottom with, how do you make or keep the progression meaningful at the same time with the story? Matt, do you want to start us off with this one?
Yeah, so I kind of have, it's a couple different answers to that. I strongly believe that if your story has progression elements, and it's actually a lit RPG with stats and all that stuff, and you can take the stats out and the story still exists just fine, then it shouldn't have the stats in the first place. And there's lots and lots of stories like that where people write a fantasy novel and they think, well, it'll probably sell better if I call it a lit RPG. And then they start adding blue screens and all this stuff. And, so as a result, I strongly feel that the progression and the story are the same thing. It's part of the story. So I think if you take that's like asking, does the story ever get in the way of the story? And of course it does. That's the bane of all writers. But so yeah, I the actual stats and stuff, they sometimes take a backseat to what's happening. I think the characters for me are always the most important part of any story. And the environment they're in, the progression in whatever environment is part of who they are. So I mean, it's so I think as long as the progression is correctly built into the story, then it's almost a moot question. It is the story,
Right.
if that makes sense.
No, absolutely. And I was thinking about that too, because, you know, how do you make the progression meaningful? Well, if your character is the focal point, then the obstacle, whatever that may be, that challenges him is what draws you in more to the character, right?
Right.
Awesome. Ryan, let's go up to you on this one now. What are your thoughts on it?
I tend to agree mostly with what Matt said. I think there is a point where progression can become too much, i.e., if you have a stat sheet on every single page and it's just all about the crunch, then we're getting to that point that he was talking about before, that that's not necessary to the story for us to be seeing that every time he gets one attribute point added to his strength for something he does. Just mention it and move on. We don't have to see all that information. But at the same time, it is very important to ensure that that kind of progression is not just secondarily slapped on top, like, you know, Brian's face on a cake. You know, we don't want to just have that. That wasn't necessary for you to eat the cake to have Brian's face on it. It was literally the icing on the cake for that. So having having those things put into the story and having it be meaningful to the reason that it's going forward is essential as well. Otherwise, it is just a high fantasy book that you thought would be cool to have extra things added onto it. So I've tried to make key components of the story just it can't fall apart without it. It would fall apart without it. You know, with Grand System Vending, I have it that the whole integration is everything is surrounded around this one type of ability to get equipment that's going to help you survive. You know, the end of the world has come. Of course, you know, living in Texas, we could raid gun stores and things left and right because there's one in every corner, like Starbucks in Seattle. But, you know, at the same time, you need to progress past just the use of those things. You're going to run out of ammunition eventually. It's not that people aren't making it anymore. Money is no longer an issue in a post-apocalyptic book. You can't go out and buy the food that you're going to spend that you need to feed yourself and your party for the week. You have to be able to acquire that somehow, and incorporating all these elements into the storyline itself is incredibly important to making sure that it's not just about adding numbers on top of a fantasy story. Like kind of like what Matt was saying.
Nope, I love it. Kyle, or excuse me, Kale, let's go down to you.
No worries. So I think this is a kind of a tough question in that it fits very well into this topic because it's very easy to get Dragon Ball Z-itis where you get addicted to giving people power-ups until your people are punching holes in moons and you have to power up your bad guys proportionally, and it just gets to the point where everything becomes absurd unless you decide to go with an overpowered main character, which is its own thing and something you can do. But unless from the beginning your intention is book 3 onward to be an overpowered main character, that can dramatically change the story that you're writing, and that's an issue. As for building the actual progression in, I will be honest, sometimes these specific numbers are more of just a quantification of getting stronger or better at something for me, especially if it's like only 1 point as opposed to like 5 points or something like that. And I try, but the thing is, anytime you give a character a doodad or a goodie, I think you need to use it. And so if the doodad is I'm giving my character +5 to strength, I need to, in the next 3 or 4 chapters, find a way to build that into whatever is going to be happening. This is especially important for me if I'm giving them a special ability. Like if I'm giving someone the ability to fly, I'd better have at least 2 or 3 spots in that book where they're going to be flying, something like that. Ultimately, what Matt said was completely correct in that the system, it has to be linked into your storytelling and progression to the point that it is the story itself. It's just a matter of, it can be tempting to give your people too much and then not use it, and it just feels kind of like fluff, or you give them stuff and it just feels arbitrary. So it's a matter of linking it together, but also making sure to not overdo it. And again, that's sort of like you're probably going to have to screw up once or twice before you actually get the right mix.
Em, let's go up to you.
I do have a train passing, so that's me. Sorry. I would start off by saying that if something is boring to you as the author, then it's going to be boring to readers. So as far as and then the second point I would make is there are haters and lovers of everything out there, whether the book is amazing or not. And so I know Matt makes some fun jokes about his 1-star reviews. And so I don't know that the point is you can't make everyone happy. So there's going to be people who want more stat sheets. They want more numbers. There's people who say, I hate this. You're clogging up my audiobook. I can't fast forward. Take them all out. And so that's another point of why it's important to read in the genre, because if you are a fan of the genre, then you can also look at how you're feeling when you go back and reread it and go, man, this took forever to get through. Or, wow, I sure have been using a lot of stat sheets, or I don't have enough. I don't know where the character is right now. What level are they again? And so unbore yourself and make yourself one of the fans, and don't try and please everyone.
That's such a great point, because it's one of those things of, you're not going to please everyone, and you have to write your own style, your own story. So with Kyle, he asked the question, when progressing, do you like to do flashbacks that can move the story forward and add some of that depth of your character? Em, let's start with you on this one. What do you think?
Oh, me? Sorry.
Yes.
You can. My name's Misty. I just put M Zog because I have 2 pen names. So.
Oh, okay.
Misty Zog is my post-apoc dystopian pen name, and so that Amazon doesn't get confused, because it's 2 very different demographics of readers, I have M Zog on my lit RPG side. Now I forgot the question. Sorry.
Sure.
Squirrel.
When you're trying to progress the story and when you're trying to write this, do you also like to add in flashbacks that can help the story move forward, but also bring you some more character attachment?
Yeah. So in my post-apoc series, I did a lot more flashbacks, and I felt like they added some depth to the characters. So if they've got some kind of mental illness going on, or some kind of phobia, or something they care a lot about, then I would throw back in stuff that happened. Also, I think it also helps with slipping out a little bit of mystery, like what we don't know why so-and-so is like this, or why they're after so-and-so. And then you can throw in, it's a great method to reveal small little pieces. That's also a great plot point to keep your story progressing, is to have a few mysteries in there, even though we're not writing mystery. But where did this magic come from? What is this new magic he has? What happened back in the day when now it's forbidden? Why is it? All those kind of things. So that's kind of what I use flashbacks for, is a way to help you either understand the character, where they are right now and why they're doing what they're doing, or to reveal small mysteries, to drip them out over the course of the book to keep, those are kind of, you want to just keep the story always having something hanging out that is unknown. You never wrap up a whole plot completely and then do the next plot. You just overlap them all. So at any given point, you're hoping the reader can't stop reading and has to just one more chapter. And you do that with revealing little mysteries, or having smaller plots that are wrapping up, interlaced instead of sequentially.
Awesome. Matt, let's go down to you.
I use flashbacks quite a bit. Like I said earlier, I think it's we have a tool chest. There's lots of different ways we can do things we can do, and I think it's a pretty effective way. I think everyone's listening to this, you should write down this. It's not a lit RPG book. It's a book called The Lies of Locke Lamora. It is written by a guy named Scott Lynch. It came out in 2000 something, and it's a book about a thief and in a city that's like based on Sicily. or Venice, I mean, in Italy, and it's told half in flashback, keeps going back and forth to the now until when he was a kid, and that's just like a perfect example of how that method can be utilized to create surprises in the future from the past, and it's just an amazing book. And I, like we were talking about in the previous question, is I read things like that, and I think to myself, yeah, I want to be able to do something like that. So, yeah, I use them all the time.
Awesome. Ryan, let's jump up to you.
I think flashbacks are fantastic if they're written well. I don't think necessarily everybody in the world writes flashbacks well. I like the way Matt has done his in Dungeon Crawler Carl. For the way that comes out, it works out great. But there's also some other people that I've read in the past, not necessarily Lit RPG, but other books where they've done flashbacks, and it kind of felt like an info dump. And I've had some bad experiences personally with info dumps where times in my story I just took a dump on the story with my info, and there's no other way to really describe that. And you just lose all momentum when you hit that moment where it's just like somebody's trying to express something that happened and why a character is a certain way, and it wasn't told in a meaningful way. It was told with just giving a bunch of information all at one moment. So I don't use them very often personally because I don't think I've quite gotten that concept fully down yet in my writing career. But if done right, it can definitely be very, very helpful and insightful and move the story along as well. But again, if done wrong, it's just a bunch of information that somebody could have probably done without.
Yeah, no, I can relate to you on that. There was another author who I've had some great conversations with. Their first book, they had a flashback, but they put the flashback right at a huge momentum build. Like we had a chase scene going on, this epic fight, and then all of a sudden, flashback. And I'm like, dude, you just ruined the whole. So anyways, no, it's a critical moment of not just, do we do flashbacks? When do we do the flashbacks? What information is given? I love that. So Kale, down to you to finish out this question.
I'm going to more or less completely agree with Ryan here with sort of like my own spin on it. Part of it is I don't do it in part because I'm not sure I trust myself to do it. I have the same issue with I've seen too many flashbacks used as info dumps. Now, part of this genre is we have to often find polite ways to do info dumps without breaking immersion. So I can't critique too hard. I have literally opened up a series with a prologue of someone reading an economics textbook. So I am the last person to be able to throw stones in this glass house. But I don't know what else to say. But my thing is, a lot of it depends upon what type of story you're trying to tell. If you're trying to tell an interlocking narrative, as sort of like an environmental, like you're getting a feel for everything, flashbacks are essential, and that's frankly kind of the vibe I get at least partially from Dungeon Crawler Carl. But like one of my favorite books of all time is Slaughterhouse-Five, and it's the first line is Billy Pilgrim has become unstuck in time, and literally I'm not sure they're actually flashbacks. The entire premise of the novel is that time isn't real and these scenes are all happening at the same time, and it really evokes and creates this like sort of like emotional panic in a way that is phenomenal. And I can't write anything that good, and most people can't, but it's great. What I'm writing is, we Lit RPG, but under Lit RPG, there's a lot of different subgenres and stuff like that. And I write a lot of suspense and thriller type stuff where we're trying to build concern, build like, God, what is the Dark Lord going to do? That sort of thing. And I found that at least for me, the way I write, the best way to do that is to jam the main character, you into the head of the main character, and to not pull out, not actually give you any real time to breathe, other than if you're getting time to breathe, that time to breathe is me building suspense for something that's coming later. There's like a monster behind the curtain and you can see its outline and you're hiding from it, sort of thing. And it's just kind of like it depends upon the story you're telling. For me, in part because I don't trust myself to do flashbacks, I write stories that flashbacks wouldn't work well in.
Oh, okay. Good stuff there. And actually, let's stay with you on this one because Sean Oswald asked a follow-up question to something you had said earlier. So does using everything you give the character, as Kale suggested, become a form of foreshadowing? Wouldn't it be more accurate for the characters to sometimes choose abilities which turn out to not be needed?
Yes and no, I would agree with that. Part of the issue is that I stand by the sort of Chekhov's gun thing. If I'm giving you a fireball, God dang it, you're gonna fireball someone. Sometimes they don't turn out to be as useful, but one of the things, especially in my more recent novels that I've been doing, is sort of minimalist systems where you have more limited sets of abilities, and a lot of it is the special abilities you get like 10 or 20 of them, and most of it is finding innovative ways to use it. And so the idea is every ability I'm going to give someone is useful. It's just a matter of them applying it. And so if I give you a useful ability and you don't apply that useful ability, it commits one of the cardinal sins of the genre, which is you have dumb MC-itis, where, if I'm going to give you the ability to do something, I want my main character to look smart and look like they're actually thinking about the 10 abilities I've given them to use them in cool and new ways, rather than I give you an ability and clearly as the author forgot to add it to my spreadsheet and only remembered it, 20 chapters later, which may or may not have happened once or twice.
Okay, very good. Misty, let's go up to you. What do you think?
Let's see. I would probably say if you have, like what Sean's trying to allude to, is that if I give an ability to my main character and then I know basically I'm telling you that, oh, this is going to be critical in the future. And so you're losing some of the, uncertainty or magic of what's going to happen in the rest of the book. So you don't want to be predictable is the point. But you also don't have to use everything. You can easily give them, they choose an ability and then it ends up being a stupid choice and then they regret it. And then they grow as a character and figure out how to become more of a power player or a support player, and they were trying to be a power player, or vice versa. And so you don't necessarily have to make them use everything. You can still have it be, I think it is important that you don't forget about it, which may or may not have happened to me too. And that you address anything that's important in the book in some way, whether they use it successfully or it comes to bite them in the butt later. It's like I think there was some old saying about the shotgun on the wall. If you describe a guy walking into his hunting lodge and you mention the shotgun hanging on the wall, you don't just leave it. You have to bring it into the story at some point in the future. So I think that's kind of what Kale's point was. If you give it to him, you can't forget about it, for good or bad.
All right, Ryan, what do you think?
Well, I have a fear of predictability, so I like to randomly give my characters skills, items, and/or abilities that will never be useful or are completely worthless, just to keep people guessing as to what's going to happen later on in the book. Because I do have that fear of foreshadowing that every time somebody gets something, you're like, oh, that's the thing they're going to use to kill off this thing that they got beaten by last time, or this is how they got through that puzzle that they couldn't solve before. So some of mine I like to just give purely out of random fun for my characters. I mean, some of them do end up being useful later. It's a nice thing to come back to. I started off my series by giving my main character an ability called vehicular manslaughter, because he just ran things over with a car after the apocalypse started. And I was like, I don't know if I'm going to use this or not later, but it's fun and it's funny. I'm kind of using it for some of the vehicle upgrades later in the book, but it's not pertinent necessarily to the story. It's just fun. But then, of course, at the same time, you want to make sure that you're going to give them things that are going to be useful. So it's finding that happy balance between, you're going to have people later asking, why the hell did you give them this? And I was like, fuck if I know, it was funny. And then the other one, the other times you've got these things that are like, well, they could have used this for that. And I'm like, yeah, they probably could have. I just forgot he had that skill. But he did win. So that's all that matters.
Nice. Matt, time to you.
This is actually, it's a pretty tough question to answer. Everyone's touched on this is they don't want one for their stories to be predictable, but two, they don't want to lose the trust of the readers either. If I give my characters a spell that's, I don't know, like TJ's fireball of hobgoblin eye melting, and then something that sounds like really cool, and then later they're fighting hobgoblins, of course he's going to use that spell, but Misty comes up with the point: if don't we want them, and Ryan too? We want to surprise them, right? So I kind of enjoy this conundrum, giving my characters things. When I write it, I give them items that I have no idea how they're going to end up using them. But you have to come up with a way that's still surprising without being a trick. For example, in one of my earlier books, I had a arrow that gave someone a venereal disease when they were stuck with it, and they ended up using it in a very unexpected way. And that sort of thing is always fun because as a writer, I like to be able to challenge myself. I deliberately write myself in the corners, just so I can come up with fun ways to do things. But when you end up giving yourself like this items that all sound awesome and cool, and the readers actually, it creates an expectation when you give a reader something like a spell or that sounds cool or a weapon. And so you almost, in some ways, you almost have to use it. But again, if you use it in the most predictable way possible, then it ends up being like, oh, yeah, a non-event. So that's part of the art. That's the trick.
I feel like it's almost what Misty said earlier, where you can't please everyone. Where
Right.
you do one thing and everyone's like, "Oh, dude, come on, man! Why didn't you just use like the mighty pen of death and destruction, or whatever?" And it's like, "Hey, man, this is the only way I figured to get out of it." So, and Sharon actually brought up a good question that you just touched on, Matt. So we'll stay with you on it. You've written yourself into a corner. Do you use the progression, or do you lean on storytelling to get yourself out of it, and why?
Well, I deliberately write myself in the corners on purpose because it forces me to come up with a solution. And we're going to re-answer the question from before. The progression and the story are usually the same. They're combined. They're part of the same thing. A lot of times, the problem is the progression can't get them out of the situation. They're being, they're like literally in a corner surrounded by a million death weasels or whatever, and none of the items that are in their bag of tricks can get them out of it. So how do we get them out of this without it being like too wand wavy? And that's the joy I find in writing, is coming up with a solution that's realistic and then makes sense. And so I've written a character that I've gone on my way to write a character that can come up with solutions on the fly. So when they do come up with a solution on the fly, whether it be, whatever it may be, that the readers, aren't like, come on. So that comes before the progression. It's like making a character that can survive in this environment and still be surprising, I guess.
Nice. I like that. Misty, let's jump up to you on this one.
That's like the magic, the it factor, right? Because when you write that kind of stuff, if you mess it up, it's pretty horrible. And then when you get it right, it's awesome. The other thing to remember when we're talking about not pleasing everyone is, you're a single person trying to manage how many characters you have in your group, and you're jumping into each of their heads. Like, what are this person going to do? And I get to the point too, I've got 4 or 5 people in this kid's crew, on the main character's crew, and they've all got their own spells too. And they're all contributing to the creative and innovative way to get out of this corner that we painted them into. So it's harder too with fans. You've got 1,000 people have read the book. They all talk together and they decide the perfect way to do it. I'm like, yeah, but 1,000 people didn't write this book. One person wrote this book. Be a little patient. But we do have all the time in the world too to go back and edit and look at it and stuff like that. So I'd say just try to That's the creative part of writing. I agree with Matt. I like that part. I like the figuring it out. My nephews recently listened to my book on a drive, and they're like 9 and 11, and they were super surprised. They came up and they're like, "Yeah, Misty, I didn't know you could even like do stuff like that." And their big question was, "How do you come up with those ideas? Did you make all of that up yourself?" And so when you get to that point, that's the fun. That's the joy of being an author, is making all of that up yourself and coming up with hopefully stuff that's well received by a chunk of the readers. The outliers can just go somewhere else. Anyway.
Nice. I like that. Kale, let's jump down to you.
So to touch on something Matt said that I think is completely correct is I really, to keep things fresh, I do exactly what he said, where I might give my person something cool, but I never pre-plan out my battles. I plot, but my plot is maybe 2 sentences along with a note as to what is going to, what the purpose of that chapter is. And what I like to do is I like to put my characters in a tough spot and then think through how they're going to get out of the tough spot. And sometimes it's a really tough spot and I take a shower and the answer doesn't come to me. I take a walk and the answer doesn't come to me. But it's always a matter of doing exactly what he said, where you put them into the tough spot and you work them out of it. But my thing is that, they're going to work out of it using the powers or whatever they got from the system. That's readily apparent. But giving them like a plot armor power up. One thing that a lot of people do that I just can't do is I'm going to use my level ups to suddenly heal all of my hit points. God bless you to people who do that. It just feels like it doesn't work with the worlds I make. And usually I can think up some very innovative way of using 2 or 3 skills together along with a skill from like someone else in the party where we can figure something out. And so again, it's all stuff from the system, but it's not necessarily like progression itself. The only time I completely got myself written into a corner, I just ended the series. I mean, I brought it to what I thought was like a good ending, but like it was
smashing the game board.
And they all died. The
A big
well, there you go, guys. There's the best
that was the
advice,
economics book too. That
if
was the
it's in a
economics
corner,
book.
finish the series, then you're done. No more worries. Awesome.
I do
Ryan,
the same thing.
Oh.
Or like when Jeff voices a character, I don't like the voice. I just kill the character off.
Problem solved.
Oh my
Exactly.
It makes sense.
I did
Ryan, up
enjoy
to
your
you.
Kickstarter options that were die in one of my books, but for another $100, you can survive in one of my books.
Well, that's been my $15 Patreon level for a while now. Is I write you in and kill you horribly. Yeah.
Perfect.
Ryan, what do you got for this question?
It sounds like, unlike most everybody else in this panel, I'm deathly afraid of corners. My bedroom is round. I'm so scared of corners. But I'm always afraid that I'm going to. Me and a friend of mine have coined this term that I'm going to Tolkien the book up. In that the only option I'll have is their eyes all close or they pass out and they wake up and they go, "We have no idea what happened, but all the bad guys are dead." Kind of a situation that you can get yourself into. So while I do definitely try to make sure that everybody gets challenged, because nobody wants just a boring book where the MC just runs through like the old Dynasty Warriors games, just hacking and slashing 10,000 people to pieces in a matter of 5 minutes. At the same time, giving them some kind of a challenge to struggle against makes the characters grow, gives them something to progress through and past. Since we are still talking about the progression of this, it's difficult for me to write myself into too hard of a corner. But I've definitely done it before, and there have been times where I've been like, nope, delete, need to redo that, so I'm not so hard in the corner. And then at the other times I was like, oh, hey, I gave them vehicular manslaughter where they can just run everybody over, and I didn't think about that at the time, or whatever the case is, for giving them something that I've used in the past, which is is one of the other great things about sometimes just giving them random things that you think are funny, because sometimes they just need a laugh in the middle of the book, so it's not taken, in my book anyways, at least, not taken too seriously. I try not to take everything completely serious all the time, to keep people interested in it. So it's hard when you get into some of those corners to come up with something if you haven't already prepared the readers for, or the characters for what they're going to go through, and you want to be sure that they are prepared in some way, or at least can come up with some kind of creative solution to it. A meathead isn't necessarily going to be able to figure out the physics of setting up the catapult that they needed to get the thing to hit this far off target to work. But at the same time, if you've had somebody in there that can do those kind of things, it at least gives you an option for the way out. So options
Well,
is
that's
usually
a
the
negative
direction I go
attitude,
for that.
Ryan. He possibly could. I'm just saying. Okay, so
Barbarian
we
would
got.
just throw the catapult.
Yeah, see, it's like, oh, I just do it myself. We've got about 5 minutes left, so we only have time, I think, for one question. We have two, so sorry, Richie. I'm not going to put yours up there. We're going to go with Kyle's, because this is progression
Just
of the
really out
storyline.
to screw Richie today.
I'm sorry about earlier, but I've never looked my best. I'm just saying. So Kyle's asks, is the progression broken if the MC had a mentor that is lost because of a mistake they made? Who wants to start us out on this one?
No,
Okay, to Matt. He says no.
that's my answer. Of course not.
Yeah,
I mean-
I felt like it's a pretty easy answer, but
Yeah, send Richie feet pics. Tell them Matt sent them. Stats on Stats podcast.
It's a good podcast.
It's a great podcast. If I'll go on that podcast if 20 people send him feet pics.
done. Let's do this.
Anyway, sorry. Go ahead.
Well, I mean, the question was, and he said no, but that
No,
mentor,
absolutely not.
one of those main characters, has a huge event. I think maybe it's not necessarily the progression of the story, but maybe the pacing of the story, where you really need to slow the pace down for the momentum or the magnitude of the event that happened.
It's kind of a trope. It's like Karate Kid 2. Mr. Miyagi ran away from that one guy and then ended up not fighting him, and then Daniel LaRusso and came back and fought that guy's protege. It's a thing. I don't think it messes up the progression at all.
Nice.
No, it would have died a long time ago if that had been the case, because like Matt said,
Yeah.
it's literally a trope in here that the master dies and they use that as inspiration to move on to, become better than they were, or learn, or suddenly all of the lessons made sense after the master dies or whatever. So
I'd say it depends on how important the mentor is in the story. I'm one of those people that hates when characters I really love get killed off. I understand it has to happen, but I think you got to look at reader expectations. So if you've had this mentor be like the secondary or the third character in the story, and then your main character does something stupid to kill him off, that's going to piss a lot of readers off, because that's the whole, they don't like you. In general, you don't like stupid main characters, but you want them to be realistic, so you understand they're going to make mistakes. But if they go and get their mentor killed, who you really liked because they had a lot of page time in the story, that's different than if it starts out with this distant mentor that we see once or twice, and now his death becomes like a motivating, push to get the main character to grow up and open his eyes and go do something. So I think that I'd put that in the, do you kill off? How main of a character does killing them off become a bad thing? I don't know if I said that right. How big does the character have to be before it hurts the story to kill them off versus a semi-side one? So
That makes sense. That was
Anybody can die at any time for any reason.
yeah, see, so I had a
Amen.
co-writer for some of my post-apoc books, and I'm the don't kill anybody I care about type of author, and she's the kill them off to make the story better. And so we actually struck quite a nice balance. We'd have these arguments. She'd want to kill so-and-so off, and I'd argue why, no, not that person. Then I'd offer up some alternatives. How about we kill this one or this one off, but not that one? And so those were some interesting, like as if they were real people. We were discussing their murder and dismemberment and having to come to, it's post-apoc, so there's all the
Oh,
bad
yeah.
guys doing
It's
gross things.
justified.
Yeah. So
Kayla,
actually,
what do
it's a good balance. I think she killed off too many people when she was writing on her own, and I probably don't kill off enough when I'm writing on my own. And together we found a good balance. So
Nice. All right, Kale, to close us out on the question, what do you think?
Very briefly. No, I kill mentors all the time. You either have to kill them or surpass them or not have them in the book. The character needs to grow, so they're getting past the mentor at some point. The other side of that is if I'm killing a character, either they don't have a name and barely matter, or I'm going to make you care about them. I hate unearned attempts at getting sympathy and having people care about it. Like, I will spend a book and a half developing a character to kill them in the most awful way possible because I want you to feel what the main character is feeling. And, I want my worlds to feel dangerous, not like everyone's holding your hands. So I'm not going to George R.R. Martin this and just, kill everyone off every other chapter. But every once in a while, someone's going to die and it's going to hurt because that's real life. People die and it hurts.
Nice. All right, guys. Well, I think that's all the time we have. Thank you so much. Why don't we just go around the room one more time in closing statement, let our people know where they can find you. And I see Geneva's already putting it in the chat. So where can they find you? What's your current work that you're working on? And when do you think it's going to be released? Misty, let's start with you.
You can just find me on MZog or my post-apoc stuff if that's your flavor on Misty Zog. And Book 1, Awakening Horde, just came out in July. And Book 2 is coming out in January. I'm editing it and sending it off to J.S. Arquin, the narrator, next month.
Awesome. Congrats on that. Ryan, over to you.
Well, my name again, Ryan Maxwell, author of Grand System Vending up on Royal Road. Putting a chapter out a day right now. We're just about to hit the 30,000 view mark, so pretty excited about that. Hoping to get finished up with the final draft of the book by the 1st of November, and then we'll see about where we go from there on editing and when it's going to be up on Royal Road. But when it's going to be up on Amazon. I will keep everybody in the loop for when that happens, though.
Awesome. Kale, down to you.
I'm on Amazon periodically on Royal Road. Right now I'm trying to write as far ahead as possible. So there will be a Royal Road resurgence at some point, but I have to write like 2 books first before that happens. So I am on a very long Royal Road hiatus. On Amazon, my series 2 are completed. Viceroy's Pride and Blessed Time. Blessed Time is the economics textbook one, if you're interested. The current ones are Tower of Somnus, where I have a book ready to have final edits and then go to narration, but there's a long wait because that happens. So that's probably February or March. And I'm also writing Dream of Wings and Flame, where I have a Google Doc open on chapter 26 right now.
Awesome. And then Matt, close us out.
My name is Matt Dinman. I write a series called Dungeon Crawler Carl. I have a Kickstarter going. I think she has the link in there somewhere. Click it. We're almost at our next stretch goal, which is a pretty cool prize. So back it. Thanks.
That's awesome. All right, everyone, thanks for tuning in. I am TJ Lombardi, and this is Brian's face. So we appreciate you guys showing up, and we'll hopefully see you at the next panel.
Yes.
There we go.